Welcome to this week's bonus episode of Gaslit Nation. I am your host, Andrea Chalupa, a journalist and filmmaker and the writer and producer of Mr. Jones, the film the Kremlin doesn't want you to see, so be sure to watch it, because that history is repeating today. And Mr. Jones ultimately was a warning that Western corruption helps dictators mass murder millions, and that is what Trump wants to help the Kremlin do. Why? Because Trump wants to be a dictator, as we're seeing here at home, starting with his violent scapegoating of trans people who have the right to exist and will exist with or without the cruel laws attacking them. Repealing these laws, stopping these laws, just makes it safer for them to exist. They'll exist either way because they've always existed throughout history. And also immigrants who Trump is sending to his first concentration camp in Guantanamo Bay, out of reach of protesting crowds, activists, and journalists. Believe your eyes and ears, this is what it looks like. To help us believe our own inner light, to get through this storm and take back our country from these Confederate Nazis, Gaslit Nation will hold our first book club at next week's salon, Monday, February 24 at 4 p.m. Eastern. As announced previously on the show, we're reading Albert Camus' The Stranger and Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, two books that capture the emotional truth of our time. Both are two short, extraordinary books, some of the most profound that I've ever read. Viktor Frankl, for instance, was a neurologist and psychologist who survived the Holocaust and wrote down his observations on the many ways people resisted and confronted the genocide in the death camps. He describes how concentration camp prisoners organized a seance, they organized cabarets. One woman on the verge of death developed a spiritual relationship with a tree, and it is one of the most extraordinary accounts I've ever read. I do not have words to do this justice. Man's Search for Meaning is a book that everyone must read to learn from the history, to understand the casual Nazi sadism that has already started here in the US, with Elon Musk, who proudly threw up a Nazi salute twice at Donald Trump's inauguration in front of some of the world's biggest oligarchs like Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg. And now Musk is illegally, deliberately destroying countless government programs and agencies funded by Congress who legally has the final say in this. There's a whole process. There's a whole legal process. And Elon Musk is openly, brazenly, cruelly breaking the law. So I want to put this out to you. If they are being this brazen and openly, repeatedly breaking the law, why should we trust that they legally came to power in the first place? I don't think we can. And again, listen to the conversation with Greg Palast on this week's Gaslit Nation that we just ran. So we will discuss both books, Albert Camus' The Stranger and Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, in this Monday's salon for our Patreon community, 4 p.m. Eastern. To join that discussion, be sure to subscribe to the show at patreon.com/gaslit. There's a lot happening in the world, and we will have an all-new episode of Gaslit Nation this Tuesday to help us sort through it. Until then, this week's bonus show continues my discussion with Elie Mystal, the justice correspondent for The Nation and the author of the new book, Bad Law, 10 Popular Laws That Are Ruining America. Then you'll hear a continuation of my conversation with investigative journalist Greg Palast, the filmmaker behind the must-watch free documentary Vigilantes, Inc., a name taken from the KKK. You have to watch this on how Jim Crow is coming back with a vengeance. Both of these conversations with Palast and Mystal, they complement each other because they're talking about the same thing. The Republicans' long game to turn America into a white supremacy dictatorship. And the Democrats have had no plan for this because it's all been out in the open. These are two very important conversations about the crisis that we're in, not just for our country here at home, but therefore the world. And the rest of the world needs to join us, the resistance here in America, to stop this evil. This is an all hands on deck global resistance because America cannot free itself from this alone. We need everyone, Canadians, Europeans, folks in Japan, wherever you are in the world listening to this, Kenyans, you need to fight like hell to strengthen your democracy, confront corruption where you live, because by doing that, you're going to make it harder for our oligarchs to spread this virus of hate and destruction around the globe. The resistance to Trump is global. Please remember that. Have moral courage. Take social responsibility wherever you are in the world listening to this. We need you. It is all hands on deck. Strengthen democracy where you live. Vote, primary the complacent idiots in power. Run for office yourself. Vote for the lesser evil when the time comes, because that is a strategy. It is not a love letter, it is a strategy. And if more people took that strategy in the 2024 election, we wouldn't be in this crisis. And that's a fact. That is a fact. So please, we all need you. If you don't like your leaders, primary them. If you get stuck with them anyway in the ballot, do what you need to do and crowd their offices, demand accountability. All right? It is all hands on deck. This is not a drill. This is it. This is it. This is a dangerous crossroads, not just for America, but the world. All right. And so after the conversation with Ellie Mistal in this week's bonus show, you'll hear a continuation of my conversation with investigative journalist Greg Palast on how filmmakers can confront the times we live in, much like Casablanca. To hear this full episode, be sure to become a member of Gaslit Nation's Patreon at patreon.com/gaslit. Discounted annual subscriptions are available. And if you're already a member, you can give the gift of Gaslit Nation. Thank you to everyone who supports the show. We could not make Gaslit Nation without you.
I know it's hard, but if you want an international response to our bullcrap, the appropriate international response to what we are doing is economic sanctions and divestment from America. And that is one of the only things that can help us. And it works. We know it works. Divestment ended apartheid in South Africa. We know economic sanctions work. We just need the global community to have the will to do it to us. And that will has to come from an understanding that, again, we are a failed state and a rogue nation and need to be treated as such.
Ivanka Trump, her girlfriend, Kim Kardashian, like Ivanka Trump should be sanctioned from the EU. Yeah. Right? Like these people should have travel bans and sanctions, just like Russian oligarchs and their family members.
Yeah. Just like Uday Hussein was once, whatever. Like we got to start treating the Trumps like we know how to treat foreign dictators and their families. We know how to make it so that they can only feel safe staying in their country. We know how to not respect them on the international stage. We know how to embarrass them on the international stage. We have to start doing it to Trump. People have to start doing it to Trump. Again, people keep looking for America to like handle its own backyard, and we should. There are reasons why we suck, but I also look towards the rest of the world to start treating us with the disrespect that we deserve. Because we know y'all talk about us, right? We know what we look like, right? We know you're all sitting there in your cafes being like, oh, look at those dumbass Americans, right? Well, don't just talk. Do something, right? And that's something to sanction. Sanction us, Macron. Let's go, buddy. Right? Like that's what needs to happen. Like, don't just be snooty about it. They're stupid American. No, like stop trading with exactly Ivanka when she's pitching whatever fragrance in Paris, complicity or whatever she's calling it these days. Take that off the shelves. You do not cologne yourself with the rogue nation, is what I need to start hearing from the European community, right? We know Africa be down. Let's go. I mean, we're trying to say, we know China would be down. Like, it's time to start treating us like the rogue nation we are. And that absolutely extends to Trump's family.
What about the International Criminal Court? couldn't these cases, like, shouldn't we as journalists and historians and all the analysts, shouldn't we be documenting all of this that's happening like a Nuremberg trial and bring a case to the International Criminal Court against Musk, Stephen Miller, Donald Trump, everyone around them, Susie Wiles, who likes to pretend that she's so shocked face about what's happening when she knows perfectly damn well what's happening and what she signed up for. They have a concentration camp at Guantanamo Bay so no one could watch it. How are we going to get to Guantanamo Bay? You know what I mean? Like, it's like, what's happening there? These predators, like, where's QAnon when you need them to be storming Guantanamo Bay? So, like, where does the International Criminal Court fit in, and how do we get there?
I used to point out during the Bush administration, during the Bush-Cheney administration, the last time this country was run by unhinged war criminals, that the reason why, like, African warlords or South American dictators seem to not respect things like the International Criminal Court and the United Nations and things of that nature is because they damn well know that those courts work for white people, that those banks, the World Bank, these institutions, these international law institutions, that they have no stomach to actually bring charges and sanctions against white folks, against powerful white folks. Oh, they'll go after Slobodan Milosevic, you know, and your little Balkan nation. Oh, we'll go mess with him. But anybody with real power, they already know that these courts would do nothing. And they saw it during the Bush-Cheney years, and they're seeing it again. Because if the International Criminal Court had any balls, basically, for lack of a better word, they would be bringing charges against Trump and Miller right now for human rights violations. They would have brought them against them in 2017 during the family separation policy. I actually wrote a post in like 2018 about how, according to the rules of the International Criminal Court, according to the rules of the Geneva Convention, that Trump and Miller were in violation of international human rights standards back in 2017. And these courts and these institutions and these leaders did nothing to sanction or hold them accountable, which is why the less developed world does not respect these courts and institutions, because they know that when a powerful white person violates these rules, nothing ever happens to them, right? So yeah, I would love for the International Criminal Court to get involved. They're clearly in violation of various standards and have been for 8 years. But they won't, because Trump is a powerful white man running a powerful white country, and they don't have the stomach for that.
Once the money dries up, right, we're seeing the start of it. There's all these nonprofits, all these organizations, the check is just not clearing. So Musk and his Hitler Youth army of programmers are freezing grants. So once the Head Starts, the preschools, all of it, all these programs dry up in these Republican hostage states, and it finally hits these MAGA voters what they've done, and their lives are suffering. They're thrust deeper into poverty. Don't you think, I know they're stuck in these disinformation tombs, but don't you think that eventually they're going to be like, my life's been destroyed under Trump, and they're going to rise up and do something?
That's not how the white brain works. Just historically speaking, that's not how white people think. Historically speaking, as long as white people feel like black people are getting it worse, they'll be happy with it. They'll take it. They'll take any, and again, I'm just talking from a historical perspective. Maybe white people are different now than they were 100 years ago. I don't think so. But historically speaking, white folks will take any destruction to their lives as long as they feel like black people are getting it worse. That is the story of America as much as any other story, as much as apple pie. And so, no, I don't think that MAGA will have a come to Jesus moment. I don't think MAGA has any idea about what the world looks, the benefits of an equal pluralistic society. They don't want that world. They want a world where white folks come out on top. And if coming out on top is still really crappy, but you're on top of some black folks, that's enough for most of Trump's voters, for most of his people. What you need to change, the thing that will ruin Trump's support, is if the rich white folks start losing money, right? The poor white folks, you can take, again, you can take anything you want away from poor white folks, and as long as you're taking more, as long as you are perceived to be taking more away from poor black folks, the poor white folks will go for it. The rich white folks, once you start messing with their money, that's when Trump will lose and Musk will lose support, and super quick. So I look, in terms of, on that scale, I kind of look at what the dollar is doing. Right now it's surging. If it that could mess them up, right? So even there are a couple stories in the Wall Street Journal recently, which I hate read. Investors starting to, after initial Trump euphoria, investors begin to wonder if, electing an orange madman was the best thing for your 401k, guys. So far he is. At the point where he's not, then Trump has a real problem, right? But no, the poor white folks, the ones that are like, I wish I could buy a Cybertruck, like those, they're because it's identity politics all the way down. It's when people are just like, you should stop playing identity politics. Man, I'm not the one who plays it. It's the white folks who play it. It's the white folks that are always willing to vote with Team White, whatever that does to them. Team White, right or wrong, is how identity politics starts, right? And that's what your problem is. It is the desire of poor white folks to just feel better than everybody else that screws everything up. And no, so I don't think there's any level of economic pain and torture that you can inflict on them that will make them see the error of their ways. Now, if there is a different party candidate who promises to make their lives better in ways that they understand, without seeming like they're going to make, while still giving them the suggestion that they will rise to the top more fastly and more quickly than the comparatively situated black person, that could work. That could, poor white folks are, put like this, poor white folks are dedicated to Team White. They're not dedicated to Team Republican. Team Republican has just been the most effective team at making itself Team White. But Democrats could do that too. They have in the past. They could in the future. And that could break some of them out of their Republican leanings. But the Democrat who then goes all in on Team White is going to have a pretty hard time winning a primary in the multicultural, multi-ethnic, diverse Democratic Party. So there are lots of factors in play, right?
So yeah, and you see Trump reacting to the markets. Like, he knows that his fate is tied up with how the markets are doing. There's also like an ego pride thing for him as well. Like, he really craves being finally accepted by that class of elites. So final question. How do you see America's tragedy playing out? What sort of course are we on now? How do you see things playing out? Do we have to just wait for him to die in power like Frankl, and then we all have to rise up to stop Ivanka Trump becoming the first woman president? Like, where are we in the timeline?
So, where are we in the timeline is a question that I've thought about a lot recently, right? Because again, historically speaking, when white people get this way about crushing blacks, that's a cycle that takes about 50 to 100 years to play out, right? Like that is a cycle that has happened multiple times throughout this country's history. And it takes a while for white people to lose the bloodlust that they have right now, right? So the question becomes, when did this cycle start? And that tells you how close we are to it being over. So one argument is that the cycle started in 1980 with Ronald Reagan. Right? That's a really good argument that Ronald Reagan was the white, like, we're done with this. We're done with the civil rights era. We're done with multiculturalism. White pride. Like, you could trace that to 1980. And if we think that this started in 1980 and that, the Clintons and the Obamas and the Bidens were just blips in that timeline, then we're almost done. Actually, then that's a hopeful thing to say that it started in 1980, because we're probably almost done with this cycle. And once this Trump generation, not just Trump, but like the people, like, once this generation dies off, we'll be in a better place, right? I don't start the cycle in 1980, though. I don't think that's the right date. I start the cycle in 2008. I start the cycle with the election of the first black president. And I think that is very similar to the election of Hiram Revels, the first black senator to the Senate in Mississippi after the Civil War, right, during Reconstruction. I think it is one thing for white folks to understand that we live in an equal society. It is a completely different thing for white folks to have to deal with black people in power. And when white folks see black folks in power, that breaks them. That does something weird to the small-minded whites of this country. And we saw that after Hiram Revels with the end of Reconstruction and the immediate institution of Jim Crow and some of the most brutalized racial violence in this country's history, right? And that bloodlust, as I put it, did not let up for 60, 70 years. So if I start the cycle in 2008 and I say that, the election of Barack Obama is like, oh my God, they letting the Negroes in charge now, and that breaks the small-minded white brain, and it's going to take another 50, 60 years till they get over that, then we are very near the beginning of this cycle that's going to last for the rest of our lives. And it's something that our children and grandchildren are going to have to fight. And I think a lot about preparing my kids for that fight, preparing my kids to continue a fight I now know I will not live to see the end of. And that is depressing, and that is arresting. But I think it's true. And I think that there is some hope that, my children will be able to fight these people. If I raise them right and I give them the right tools, my children will be able to fight these people, and my children will leave to see better days than I will. And that is hopeful. As as much as it's kind of a depressing note, it's also a hopeful note that my progeny will survive this, even if I don't.